Eli Ward woke to a silence so complete it felt alive. Not the quiet of peace, but the kind that settles after something terrible has already happened. No wind, no horses, no morning birds, only the hollow stillness of smoke and ash hanging in the air. He sat up fast, heart hammering against his ribs, and reached for the Winchester leaning beside his bed. The air tasted wrong, bitter, heavy, like burnt earth after rain. For a moment, he wondered if he was still dreaming. Through the cracked window, the early light showed him what should have been impossible. The barn still stood. The fences still held. The trough shimmered faintly with water. Everything looked untouched except for the ground. The dirt around his cabin was scorched black in a perfect circle, ending just 3 paces from his porch. And standing at the edge of that circle was a woman. She faced away from him, motionless. Her dress was the color of dust, her long black hair braided tight and streaked with ash. In her hands she held something wrapped in burned cloth. Eli pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The rifle hung loose in his grip, but his finger rested close to the trigger. The burnt soil crunched under his feet like shattered glass. When he stopped a few feet behind her, he could see that her hands were dark with soot, and small stones hung from a cord around her neck. "Who are you?" His voice came out rougher than he meant. The woman turned slowly. Her eyes dark, calm, unreadable, met his without hesitation. She said nothing, only lifted her hands to show him the charred bundle she carried. The cloth was scorched at the edges. Inside lay a piece of blackened wood carved with strange symbols. "You need to leave," she said quietly, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. Eli frowned. "Leave? Why?" "Because you should be dead," she answered. "Your cabin should be gone. Your horses, your fences, everything ash. But I was here." Eli's throat tightened. The ground between them felt heavier somehow, as if it remembered the fire that never came. "Why would you help me?" he asked. Her gaze lingered on his face a moment longer before turning toward the burning horizon. "You don't owe me gold, Eli Ward. You owe me the truth when you're ready to hear it." Then, without another word, she walked toward the ridge beyond his land, the one place people never went. He called after her, but she didn't turn back. When the wind finally rose again, it carried with it the faint smell of smoke and something older, something that whispered of the dead who never truly left. Eli stood in the circle of ash long after she disappeared, clutching the burned piece of wood and wondering how she knew his name. The sun crawled over the edge of the plains, spilling pale gold across the valley. Eli Ward's ranch, what little there was of it, sat alone between 2 ridges of stone that locals called the Widow's Bones. The name came from the way the rocks jutted toward the sky, white and crooked, like fingers clawing at heaven. Eli had chosen this patch of land for one reason, because no one else wanted it. The soil was dry, the wind unkind, and the nearest town was 20 miles of dust away. He'd built his cabin himself, 1 log at a time, with nothing but a hammer, a mule, and his stubborn will. The neighbors, few as they were, called him the Ghost Rancher, because he kept to himself and didn't speak much when he did ride into town. Once, long ago, Eli Ward had been a man with more than silence for company. He had a family name in Tennessee, a small piece of land that burned in the war, and a younger brother who never came home. When he crossed the Mississippi with what little he had left, he made himself a promise. No more debts, no more blood, no more ghosts. But ghosts don't keep promises. That morning, as he poured black coffee into a tin cup, his eyes kept drifting to the burned circle outside. It wasn't just fire damage. It was too clean, too exact. A deliberate border, as if something had been kept out or worse, contained within. He knelt by the edge, running his calloused fingers over the dirt. The soil was warm, almost pulsing faintly beneath the crust of ash. He could still see the faint impressions of boot tracks, hers. Small, narrow steps leading from the ridge, stopping at the circle and turning back again. He thought about the woman's words, "You should be dead." The way she'd spoken them without pity, without surprise, still echoed inside his chest. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of cedar and distant rain. From far off came the creak of a saddle and the low hum of cattle, reminding him that life still moved out there, somewhere beyond the shadow of last night. He looked toward the ridge where she had vanished. People said that beyond it lay the lands of the Greyfeather tribe, long abandoned after the army raids, cursed by those who died defending it. Eli had never believed in curses, but the ground beneath his boots, blackened and humming like it held its breath, made him wonder if maybe belief didn't matter. Inside the cabin, his rifle leaned against the wall, his coffee had gone cold, and a sense of unease gnawed at the back of his mind. Something had tried to burn him out and something else had stopped it, and whatever that woman had done last night, it wasn't just luck, because the fire had obeyed her. By late afternoon, the air had grown heavy, the kind of weight that comes before a storm. Eli saddled his horse, a weathered buckskin named Thorn, and rode toward the stream that cut through the valley. He needed to clear his head, to convince himself that what happened last night had some kind of reason that men could understand. But reason didn't explain the perfect burn ring. Reason didn't explain how a stranger knew his name. When he reached the creek, he knelt beside it and splashed water over his face. The cold bite of it brought him halfway back to the present. He looked down and caught his reflection trembling in the water-gray eyes, a beard he hadn't trimmed in weeks, and a man who looked more ghost than living. That's when he noticed it. Across the stream, wedged into the trunk of a cottonwood, was a charred piece of wood carved with the same strange marks the woman Naya had shown him. He pulled it free. The grooves were deep, etched by someone with precision and purpose. And when he turned it over, the backside bore something else. A mark he recognized. The brand of a local cattleman, Hollis Crane. Eli's stomach twisted. Crane owned 3 ranches west of town and half the men who rode through it. A man like that didn't burn land for fun. He burned for profit. And if his mark was here, it meant someone had sent a message. Get out, or be erased. He jammed the piece into his saddlebag and turned Thorn back toward home. The sun dipped low, painting the valley in amber light. As he neared the cabin, a figure on horseback appeared on the ridge, riding slow, deliberate. Porter Lane. The old rancher tipped his hat, his face drawn tight with worry. Heard talk in town, Eli. Folks said there was smoke near your place last night. You all right? Eli nodded, handled it. Porter's eyes narrowed at the scorched ground that still framed the cabin. That don't look handled to me. Someone tried to run you off. Or worse. You need to report it. Eli shook his head. Ain't nothing the law will do that I can't do myself. Porter sighed, pulling on his reins. I've seen this before. Ranch fires, cattle thefts, land changing hands for next to nothing. Every time, it ties back to Hollis Crane and his men. You cross him, you better be ready to bury what's left. He hesitated before adding, and there's talk of an Apache woman seen near your land. Young one. Folks are saying strange things, witch fire, spirits, old curses. Eli's jaw tightened. People say a lot when they don't understand what they fear. Porter studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward in the saddle. Fear or not, watch your back. A man can rebuild fences. He can't rebuild himself. He rode off, leaving Eli alone in the dying light. Eli dismounted and stared toward the ridge, where he'd last seen Naya disappear. The fire, the symbols, Crane's mark, it all led in one direction, and he knew what he had to do. If someone had tried to erase him, he needed to know why. And the only person with answers was the woman who walked into the fire and lived. He saddled Thorn again and started toward the ridge. The sun bled out behind him, and the wind whispered through the grass like voices, trying to warn him back. But Eli Ward didn't turn back. He rode into the dark, chasing the shadow of a woman who'd saved his life and maybe his soul. Eli found her as dusk surrendered to night. The ridge stretched high and jagged, carved from red stone that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Beyond it lay the Badlands, miles of rock, thorns, and whispers about those who'd never returned. He dismounted halfway up and climbed the rest on foot, boots slipping on the loose shale until he reached a small clearing near a trickle of water. A faint fire burned there, and Naya Greyfeather knelt beside it, tending to her hands. Even from a distance, Eli could see the burns across her palms, fresh, raw, but wrapped in a green paste that smelled of crushed leaves and smoke. She didn't look up when he approached. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Eli stopped at the edge of the firelight. "I could say the same." Her eyes flicked to him, calm but wary. "People talk, Eli Ward. They talk loud when they're afraid." "I know," he said quietly. "They think you started the fire." She gave a dry, humorless laugh. "They would rather believe that than face the truth." Eli crouched beside the fire. Then tell me the truth. Naya hesitated, the flames painting her face in flickering orange. Then she reached into a small leather pouch and pulled out another piece of charred wood, carved with those same strange markings. I've seen these before, Eli said. Hollis Crane's brand was on the back of one. She nodded slowly. 3 years ago, the Hendrickson ranch burned with that same mark. I tried to stop it. Too late. They died in their beds while the fire ate through the walls. Her voice cracked, though her eyes did not. I've been tracking the men responsible ever since. They burn people out, then buy the land cheap once the smoke clears. Crane leads them. His men do the burning. Eli felt the cold settle deep in his gut, and last night was my turn. She looked at him. The fire reflected in her eyes like 2 tiny suns. Yes, I stopped them, but they'll come again. Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why risk yourself for me? Naya studied him for a long moment. Because you once left food for a starving girl hiding in the hills. 3 nights in a row, long ago. She was half dead. Hunted, ready to give up. You never saw her face. But she saw yours. That girl was me. Eli blinked. The memory surfaced 3 winters past, when he'd found scraps of footprints near an old trail, small and light. He'd left food without expecting thanks, without even thinking it mattered. So that's why you were there, he said. She nodded. You saved me when I had nothing. Last night, I paid a debt. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The fire crackled softly, wind tugged at the edges of her braid. Then a new sound shattered the quiet, the distant thunder of hooves. Naya's head snapped toward the darkness. They're coming. Eli stood fast, hand going to his rifle. How many? 4. Maybe 5. She kicked dirt over the fire, killing the light, and grabbed her bow from beside the rock. The air grew thick with tension, the faint smell of smoke returning, this time real, not imagined. Eli could see torchlight glimmering in the distance, moving fast along the ridge trail. You should run, Naya said. I'm done running. Her voice sharpened. Then you'll die here. Maybe, Eli said, loading a round, but I'll be standing. The riders broke through the darkness, then 4 men, their faces hidden behind scarves, rifles strapped to their saddles, torches burning in their hands. One of them laughed a harsh, familiar sound. Hollis Crane's foreman, Wade Tiller. Found him, Wade called out. And he brought company. The men spread out, circling the clearing. Eli glanced at Naya. Any tricks left? Firewoman? Just one, she whispered. And it burns quick. She pulled a small pouch from her belt, then met his eyes. When I say run, throw it into the flame. Before he could ask what it was, Wade shouted, Let's finish what we started. Rifles lifted, torches flared. The night erupted in gunfire and firelight. Eli's rifle barked once, twice, sending 2 men ducking for cover. Sparks showered from the rocks. A bullet tore through his sleeve. Now, Naya shouted. Eli tossed the pouch into a nearby torch's fire. It burst open in a blinding white plume, thick smoke billowing across the clearing, stinging eyes, choking the air. Through the haze, Naya grabbed his hand. This way. They ran through the smoke, slipping past the shouting men, and dove into the darkness of the ravine below. Behind them, the gunfire grew faint, replaced by the roar of flames spreading through the dry brush. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and the stars blurred above them. Naya finally slowed, pressing a hand to her ribs. They'll burn everything to cover their tracks. Eli looked back toward the glow that now consumed his land. Let them. I've already lost it once before. He turned to her, his voice steady, but not this time. Not without a fight. They rode through the night, the air thick with the scent of smoke and fear. Thorn's hooves pounded against the hard earth, echoing through the canyons as if the land itself carried their flight. Behind them, the glow of the burning ranch flickered against the clouds like a dying Sunday. When they finally stopped, dawn had begun to bleed across the horizon. A pale, cruel light fell over the world, revealing exhaustion etched into their faces. Naya slid off the horse first, her hands trembling as she unwrapped fresh burns across her palms. Eli knelt beside her, his voice low. We can't keep running like this. She met his gaze, steady despite the pain. I wasn't planning to run. He frowned, Then what? Her answer came quietly, but every word carried weight. We fight. She pulled a small leather roll from her pack and unwrapped it. Inside lay maps, hand-drawn notes, and several folded pages of official documents, land deeds, each stamped with Crane's signature, and each marked by a date that matched the fires of every burned ranch. He keeps all the originals in a safe at his office in town, she said. Every deed he stole through forged transfers. It's proof everything we need. Eli studied the papers, his jaw tightening. And how do you know that? Because I watched him. Her voice faltered only slightly. After the Hendrickson fire, I tracked his men for weeks. I saw him laughing, counting money while their land still smoldered. That was the night I swore I'd stop him, even if it killed me. Eli stared at the papers, then at her. And you were doing it alone. Until last night, she said. For the first time since the fire, Eli felt something shift inside him. Not hope, exactly, but purpose. We'll take his records, show the town what he's done. Naya shook her head. He owns the sheriff, the judge, half the men with badges. The law won't save us. Then we make them listen another way. He stood, eyes fixed on the distant ridge where the town sat like a vulture waiting to pick clean what was left of the West. We bring him into the light. That evening, they approached the outskirts of Dry Hollow, a town built on promises that turned to lies. Wooden storefronts lined a single dusty street, their signs faded, their windows clouded with smoke-stained glass. Clyde's No. Hollis Crane's house stood near the north end of town, a white two-story structure with gas lamps burning behind curtained windows. Every brick of it screamed power, the kind of power bought with fear. Naya pointed toward the back, kitchen entrance, weak lock, one guard at most. Eli checked his rifle, then pulled his hat low. We get in, take the deeds, and get out before anyone knows we were here. She gave a faint smile. You've never stolen anything before, have you? No, he said, swinging the rifle across his shoulder. But I've lost enough to know what's worth stealing. They slipped through the alley like shadows. Naya picked the lock in silence, and they crept through the back door into a dark kitchen that smelled of coffee and tobacco. Voices murmured upstairs, Crane and his brother, arguing. The office door was locked, but Eli didn't hesitate. He threw his shoulder into it once, twice until the wood splintered with a crack like thunder. The voices above stopped. Naya dropped to her knees by the iron safe, her fingers working the dial. Keep watch, she whispered. Eli positioned himself in the doorway, rifle raised. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Wade appeared first, gun in hand, eyes wide. You again? You're supposed to be dead. Eli fired once high, a warning shot that splintered the wall beside Wade's head. Not yet, gunfire answered, sharp and close. Splinters rained across the office. Almost there, Naya called out, hands spinning the dial. Clyde, no. Crane appeared behind Wade, his face dark with fury. You think you can steal from me, Ward? You should have burned when you had the chance. Eli fired again, buying her time. You burned families for land. You built your empire on ashes. Crane's eyes narrowed. And I'll burn you too. The safe clicked. Naya yanked it open and stuffed the deeds into her satchel. Go, she shouted. Crane lunged forward as Eli fired one last time, the shot grazing the doorframe. They bolted for the window, glass shattering as they leapt through. Eli hit the ground first, rolling hard. Naya landed beside him, clutching the satchel to her chest. Behind them, Crane roared, his men shouting as bullets tore through the night air. They ran, horses waiting by the alley. Naya swung up behind Eli as he spurred Thorne into motion. The streets erupted with chaos, gunfire, shouting, torches flaring to life. You got them? Eli yelled over the wind. Every last one, she said. Then we're not running anymore. They disappeared into the desert night, leaving behind a town that had forgotten what justice looked like and a man whose empire was about to crumble. By the time dawn touched the edges of the desert, they had already ridden 20 miles north, following the dry riverbed until the sun rose high enough to turn the sky white. Thorne was exhausted, his flanks streaked with sweat and dust. But Eli didn't slow until Naya told him to. There, she said, pointing toward a canyon half hidden behind a wall of stone. It's safe. For now. They dismounted in silence, leading the horse into the cool shade. Inside the canyon, the air was still, filled with the faint sound of dripping water. A narrow cave opened near the base of the cliff deep enough to hide them and the horse. Eli dropped to his knees, his muscles screaming. We got the papers. Proof. But what now? Naya untied the satchel, spreading the stolen deeds across the flat rock. The morning light fell over the signatures, the forged seals, the handwritten notes of payment to the men who'd burned 5 families out of their homes. These documents can bring them down, she said quietly. The question is who will believe us? Eli leaned back against the wall, rubbing the dirt from his hands. Then we make them believe. He looked up at her, eyes steady despite the exhaustion. We take this to Porter Lane. He's the only man in that town who still knows right from wrong. Naya hesitated. If you go back there, Crane's men will kill you. Then they'll have to try harder than they did last time. There was no smile, no bravado, just quiet certainty. The same kind of strength she'd seen in him that night he stood in the ring of ash, refusing to run. They rested for a few hours before saddling Thorn again. The sky had turned the color of old brass when they reached Porter's ranch. The old man met them at the gate, rifle in hand. He studied the dirt on their faces, the torn clothes, the way Naya clutched the satchel like it was life itself. Tell me what you've done, he said. Eli stepped forward and laid the deeds on Porter's table. We've got proof, Porter. Crane's behind every fire for the last 3 years. The land deeds, the payments, it's all here. Porter's weathered hands moved slowly over the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp again, alive with something he hadn't felt in years. This is enough to hang them all, he said. Then hang them, Eli replied. Porter nodded once, then set his jaw. I'll write to the territorial marshal tonight, and I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Santa Fe gets a copy. He looked between Eli and Naya. Men like Crane think fire is theirs to command. Let's see how they like it when it turns on them. 2 days later, the law came riding in 6 deputies with iron badges and faces carved from stone. They hit Crane's house before dawn. The man who once thought himself untouchable stumbled out in his nightshirt, shouting, denying, threatening, but words meant nothing against paper and signatures. By noon, Crane, Wade, and the rest of his men were in shackles. The trial was short, but brutal. Witnesses came forward, families who'd lost everything, ranchers who'd been too afraid to speak until now. The forged deeds spoke louder than any testimony. When the verdict came, the crowd outside the courthouse was silent. Crane stood in chains, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with hate. The judge's words rang clear through the dry air. Guilty of murder, arson, and conspiracy to defraud. Sentenced death by hanging. Eli didn't cheer. He didn't move. He simply looked at Naya, standing beside him in the back of the room, her hands scarred but steady. For the first time since the fire, she allowed herself to breathe. Later that evening, as the sun fell red and low, they stood at the edge of the ridge overlooking the town. The same wind that once carried the scent of smoke now carried silence. It's over, Eli said. No, Naya replied softly. It's just beginning. He looked at her, brow furrowed. Crane is dead, but the fire he started still burns. There will always be others who think they can take what isn't theirs. Eli nodded slowly. Then we keep watch. Together, she turned to him, the last light of day catching her eyes. You'd give up rebuilding your land for this? He smiled faintly. Land can be rebuilt. Trust takes longer. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sky turned dark, and the first stars began to flicker. The desert wind moved through the grass like a whisper from the dead. Then Naya stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. You saved your land, Eli Ward. But more than that, you saved me from fighting alone. Eli reached out, his rough hands brushing the burns across hers. You saved my life, Naya Greyfeather. You gave me something worth more than gold. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, the world seemed to hold its breath. 2 souls burned and tempered by the same fire. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a new dawn began to rise. Months passed. The flames that once devoured Eli Ward's life became nothing more than stories told across campfires and saloon counters. But out where the wind still carried dust and memory, the truth lived quietly. Eli rebuilt, not on the same ground where his cabin had burned, but on a stretch of land farther east, near a river that never ran dry. The soil was better there, dark and rich. The air smelled of cedar and rain instead of smoke. Together, he and Naya built a new home, log by log, until it stood strong enough to face any storm. Every morning, he worked the fences and the horses while she tended the garden that grew beside the corral. Sometimes he caught her standing still, looking toward the horizon as if listening for something only she could hear, the voices of her people, maybe, or the memory of all she'd lost. He never interrupted. Some silences deserve to be kept. By winter, word had spread across the territory. They called him the man who brought justice to Dry Hollow and her the firekeeper, the woman who fought flames with courage and blood. Stories grew taller with each retelling how she could command the wind, how he faced 5 men alone, how the fire itself had chosen to spare them. Eli didn't care for legends, but he let them speak. The truth was quieter, humbler, and more human than any tale could capture. It lived in the way she laughed when the first snow fell, or how her hand brushed his each evening as they closed the barn door. Sometimes, when night settled deep and the fire burned low, Naya would trace the old scars on her palms. "The fire always takes something," she would say. "It never leaves empty-handed." And Eli would answer, "Maybe that's the price of light." They didn't talk about the men who'd died or the ones who'd been hanged. They didn't speak of vengeance or justice anymore. What they had was something rarer: peace. Hard-earned, scarred, and real. One spring morning, travelers passing through stopped at their gate. They asked if the stories were true, if Eli Ward and Naya Greyfeather had really saved the valley from a man who burned for greed. Eli smiled faintly. "Some of it," he said. "The rest is just the way people make sense of what they fear." Before they left, one of the travelers, a boy no older than 16, looked back at the small house framed by cottonwoods and said, "I reckon that's what the West needs. People who fight the dark without letting it swallow them." Naya stood on the porch, her braids swaying in the wind. "The dark never really leaves," she said. "But it learns to keep its distance when the right people stand together." The boy tipped his hat, and the travelers rode on. That night, as the sun drowned itself in gold and the first stars began to rise, Eli and Naya stood by the fence, the world quiet except for the low hum of the river. The ashes of the past had settled, but something brighter had taken root, a kind of fire that no wind could kill. It was not the blaze of vengeance or survival, but of grace, the kind that burns not to destroy, but to remind. And though the frontier stretched endless and wild beyond their sight, for the first time in a long time, they knew they had reached home. Every fire leaves a mark. Some scars become warnings, but others, like the ones carved into Eli Ward and Naya Greyfeather, become proof that redemption can grow from ruin, and that courage means standing where the fire once was, refusing to let it claim you again. Out here on the Western Trail, the dust remembers every footstep, every sin, and every act of grace. And sometimes, if you listen close enough, you can still hear the echo of those who chose to fight for something worth saving.